drama triangles. We've got it all going on this evening. Conflict being anything where there is a fight, there is resentment, a battle, struggle, any animosity or discord when people are at loggerheads. And often for a conflict to be in place, we need to have a victim and we need to have a persecutor. Any kind of conflict, and we're going to be focusing on a long-term conflict, things that have been going on for a while. When this kind of stuff happens, things do just go in a perpetual cycle. And the moment that this happens, well, any kind of conflict anyway, it causes pain. It's an upsetting experience. It can really hurt people. It can cause breakdowns. It can cause separations. Now, through all of this, when there is conflict, there is stress. And as many of you already know, when somebody is stressed, there is a fight or flight response happening in the system. We have a physiological shifts and changes. One of the key components of this is the blood shunting. So it's moving from our forebrain to our primitive brain, which is the part that's involved in the fight or flight and the stress. Now, the forebrain is where we think logically. Is it where we think logically, or the part that we use to think logically? It's also what's involved in curiosity, in having fun, in socializing. It's the part of us that allows us to get creative. If the blood is being shunted to the small brain, then we are just going on previous patterns, on stress patterns. If we're not able to use our forebrain, then our communication is going to be very stunted, monkey-minded. It also means that when we do listen to somebody, we're listening from a point of view of a stressed person, from a stress response. So actually we'll find that the information that comes in is going to be distorted, and it's being distorted to fit our map, our representation. So this alone, being in the stress response alone, could you get a sense of how this can just cause conflicts to keep on going and keep on going? We mishear, we don't see all the communication that's there, and we're only able to respond in ways that are a bit primitive to what we are actually able to do. So when it comes to having a look at the ongoing conflicts, this comes into play. Karpman's drama triangle. It's something that's been used in psychology and counselling and all sorts of different ways to help people look at interactions. When there's a spiral, when there's a problem, this is a really nice way to look at the roles and the happenings that are going on. I've underlined drama because drama is a really key word. You'll see, and earlier I said, for any conflict to happen, we need to have a victim and we need to have a persecutor, so also known as a blamer. Being a drama triangle, it's not intended to represent as this being a real victim. It's intended to represent someone who's feeling or acting like a victim. These are all below conscious roles that people assume in interactions and connections with others when there is tension. And it's all below conscious until we become conscious of it. What have we got going on? We've got the obvious, we've got the victim, and we've got the persecutor. We've also got a rescuer, known as the placater. In any given conflict, well, not any given conflict, in a lot of conflicts, and what I'm showing you is one way of looking at it all. We've got three roles. So the victim is somebody who often seeks to remain blameless. They're playing a role of somebody who is a bit helpless, feeling hopeless, feeling ashamed. They're often as well not able to solve problems or make decisions for themselves, and often struggle to see the brighter side in life. The persecutor is someone who's pretty strong-willed, authoritarian, They love power. They're often quite critical. They can be very blaming. They see things as right or wrong, good or bad, just black and white. There's no flexibility. It just is. And they are always right. If they admit they're wrong, if they're perceived, if they give in and say that they're wrong, they would perceive themselves as being this, so they just wouldn't do it. Now, the rescuer, often people don't know about the rescuer involved. The rescuer is somebody who is a witness to the goings on and will feel guilty if they don't get involved. There's a lot of guilt with the rescuer. This means they tend to get involved. The unfortunate thing with a rescuer is that it actually enables the victim to be a victim. It enables and allows manipulation of this whole perpetual cycle. The rescuer is also covering up their own problems. It's a distraction. If they're seen to be going in and helping a situation, then they can avoid their own problems. Now, at any given time, people can flip from role to role. The victim can easily suddenly turn into a blamer and a persecutor. They could easily turn into a rescuer. And likewise, the rescuer could turn into a victim, the rescuer could turn into a persecutor, and the persecutor to the rescuer and victim. It is so interchangeable. Now, every single role is coming from a place of pain. Every single role causes pain. Every role pretty much will have guilt involved, shame as well. It perpetuates lies and unhealthy secrets and a lot of feelings of low self-esteem and low self-worth. And these are all unconscious. People are not often aware that this is happening. And it is all coming from a place of pain. And it all, if it continues to cause pain and it spiral out of control. And the sad thing is that if this triangle is not interrupted, if these roles and the conflict is not interrupted, then it can actually be handed down, passed down through generations. And also, a key thing with it is that any role that somebody plays, I wonder if you can see it, you can see it, any role that's being played is always somebody running around trying to seek approval. So seeking approval. And that's going to mean many things for different people, I believe. All right. How's this going down so far? Fiona, I know you watching, you're familiar with this. Those of others who are watching, this might be new to you. You might already be familiar. You might recognize, perhaps, some of the roles that you've been playing in relationships. And quite often they're clearer in closer relationships. So let's take, for example, the family home. It often begins when children are squabbling. Let's say there's a couple of siblings and they're squabbling away over some toy. One of them's just got it. So the other one will often run to mum and be like, Mum, I think he's picking on me, got my toy. Now what happens there is we've got a victim and a persecutor, and then the victim has just run to mum, who then mum gets involved and is therefore the placater, the rescuer. Now, in a short term, if the situation gets diffused, great. This often perpetuates and continues and continues. And it's easy to see from this point of view, when everybody involved is adults, it's often not quite as clear. You'll all be aware yourselves, perhaps from having an awareness of this, if you have been playing roles. Or can you see, as an outsider looking in on somebody else's troubles, roles are being played? So what do? We've got this perpetual cycle, which, if not interrupted, is going to continue to cause problems. This C in the middle is what we call congruence. I also think of it as conscious awareness. The moment somebody recognizes they're playing a role in an interaction, in a conflict, the moment somebody recognizes it, well, they can no longer play that role. They cease to be either that victim, that rescuer, or that persecutor. Because when you become conscious and you wake up and you recognize to what you're doing, you can't be doing it because you're watching it objectively from an observer. Now, the moment somebody recognizes they're playing a role, should somebody recognize they're being a victim and they no longer play the victim, well, then the persecutor can't be a persecutor because there's no victim. Each role needs the other to continue the cycle. And if at one point somebody who's playing rescuer recognizes what they're doing, well, then the victim can no longer be a victim. It's beautifully interrupted just by becoming consciously aware and being congruent. I'm not sure what congruency means for you. When I think about it, congruency is when all of me is on side. When I'm working with people, recognizing that all of their communication is clear and true. They're speaking their truths. As you're probably familiar, verbal communication is about 30% of our communication. Non-verbals is the rest, about 70%, give or take a bit. Often what comes out of our mouths, our verbal communication, so often doesn't match our non-verbal communication. When somebody's in problem state, this is. So the moment somebody's non-verbal communication matches their verbal communication, that means all of them's on side and all their communication is being congruent. If somebody recognizes they're playing a role in this drama triangle, all of a sudden they're back in the middle, they're in the middle, and the triangle will no longer be played. They're being congruent because they're observing, they're coming from a pause. Because often when we recognize we're playing roles, we just suddenly pause and all sorts of thoughts come in. And it's often the moment in the pause when our stress releases. Because we can't do stress when we're thinking about what we were doing then. We just suddenly become in the moment. And when the stress response changes, the blood shift changes. All of a sudden, the blood goes from our primitive monkey mind to our forebrain, and we can begin to think logically. We can communicate with curiosity, with creativity, from a loving sense of playfulness. And yeah, right at the time when perhaps they interrupt, it might not be so loving or playful, and that's okay. The important thing is just about recognizing, and you can't unlearn this. Once we know something, as human beings, when we learn something, our mind is always designed for an upgrade. And this means when somebody becomes aware of a role that they've been playing, well, then it just interrupts things. And yeah, okay, so somebody might often flip into another role. Quite often we can recognize that we've, say, been being a rescuer and then get really peed off that we've been doing it again. And then it's like, well, that's okay, just popped into another area. And in the end, sometimes people can have a bit of a laugh at the impact and the variety of roles that they are playing as one person, because nothing is ever fixed. We're continuously evolving and rolling around. And it's okay. It's always okay. It's just about when we do recognize it, just stepping up, backing off, walking away, or just simply recognizing, because the moment we recognize, we cannot play the role and everybody else's role gets interrupted. You'll know for yourselves if you can recognize this happening, if you can see it somewhere else. So you'll know if you believe this could be useful to share. If it is, then share away. I'm putting a link up to my website where there's a lot of information you can use. Know this. I'll suggest that if you do share it because you can see somebody playing a role and they're in pain, just share with them the triangle and allow them to recognize the roles that they're playing for themselves. The moment we begin to tell somebody what role they're playing, well, then we could be perceived as doing something, and we're getting involved then. So I'd suggest just share with them the triangle, allow them to make their own choices and awareness. It's like lancing the hull of a ship, and then you let the ocean do the rest. Their beautiful mind will uncover perhaps one role at a time, and our minds will only ever reveal to us that which we are comfortable and able to consciously conceive at that moment. Because you might be aware that I've said before, our beliefs, our values, our identities are all supported and maintained by our subconscious mind. And it only therefore lets in information that supports this status quo. So if we go in telling somebody what they're doing, then their system will shut down and they'll not get the information. If we invite somebody to recognize for themselves, well, then they've recognized for themselves. And what we believe that they recognize might not be what we believe to be their key, and that's okay. One layer at a time, recognizing one role, they may discover in time, it doesn't matter how much time, another role. Just a simple way to perhaps look at conflict from a different point of view. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks, guys. Nice to see you.